everybody. It's Maris here. Thank you for joining us again for another live draw. We're going to be talking about penguins today. And I know I'm wearing a hat and scarf and mittens, but I wanted to start by saying that most of the penguins on this planet live around places where the weather is kind of like Massachusetts. Cold in the winter and hot in the summer. So we're going to be talking today about three different types of penguins: African penguins, Rockhopper penguins, which are two species that live at the aquarium. And then we're going to travel to Antarctica to talk about Adelie penguins. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Maris Wicks. I write and I draw comic books about science. For 8 years, I was an educator at the New England Aquarium, and some of my job allowed me to dress up as a penguin. So at some point, you'll see pictures of me dressed as a Rockhopper penguin. And in 2016, I had the amazing opportunity to live in McMurdo Station, which is the largest research station in Antarctica, for about 2.5 months. And during that time, I was able to travel to Cape Royds and visit a Adelie penguin colony and work with the scientists there to help communicate their science. So that's why I threw in the Adelies at the end. So I brought my globe. Just because we're doing a lot of traveling from home these days. So I think it's really cool to explore places that are far away through resources that we have, like books, documentaries, or participating in events like this, where you get to talk to artists or scientists or other educators. So I want to take us first, come on, globe, to the coast of Southern Africa down here, because we're going to talk about African penguins. So grab your pencils and grab your paper. And like I said, I've done this before. So the way that I'm going to draw penguins today is not the right way or the wrong way. It's the way that I draw them. I hope that me showing you the process of how I draw can help you learn to draw animals that you're excited about. But like I said, no right or wrong way to do this. And you don't have to be a kid to participate. Adults can do this too. Anybody can do this activity. We're just going to talk a whole bunch about penguins and draw them. And if you have questions at any time during the live chat, please feel free to write them in as a comment on the live chat. And I'll be answering questions kind of throughout the drawing. So let me switch my winter gear for my headphones. And let's get over to the drawing board. I'll put my globe away. Ooh. So, if you've been with us the past couple of video chats, we were focusing more on animals that live in the giant ocean tank. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got a list of things that I like to put as a reminder of what I want to pay attention to when I'm drawing an animal. So body shape, fins or limbs. So in this case, we're going to be looking at feet and wings on a penguin, because penguins are birds. Mouth, so a beak, eyes, just because as humans, we tend to focus on the face of not just other humans, but other animals. That's just a thing that we do. Patterns and behavior. And behavior is a little tricky. We're going to be looking at photos today. So you'll see a lot of photos pop up on the side of the screen. And I want to let you know that even though I draw very cartoony, I use lots of photos to help me draw the animals that I do. So they'll be cycling through and talking about some of the things that we're gonna mention today. So let's start with our African penguins. So penguins, I'm going to just think about body shape. So we're going to start with just kind of like a plain side view of a penguin. And for body shapes, they have kind of I know I talk a lot about sausages when I draw stuff, but they have kind of a sausage-shaped body. They've got a tail on the end. Got some little feet there. And you'll see me do something that I've done with fish before. I like to sometimes just draw lines to mark kind of the center part. So I'm drawing this penguin in kind of a 3/4 view. So that means this is like front on, this is side view, and I'm drawing this penguin kind of from that view. And I'm sorry, I didn't have an African penguin toy. I only had a chin strap penguin. We're not talking about those today, but penguin morphology, so kind of their shape and their bodies and their functions they have a lot of similarities. So forgive me, I'm using a different species. The other, this isn't a toy, but I have a lot of penguin figurines because I love penguins. And I had a couple of the penguin toys that I brought along. So, and then head, and their head, you can think of it as kind of like a circle, but connected on a neck. We've got a pointy beak that is very much triangle shaped. And then wings. So a lot of times people see penguins and they're like, wait, penguins are birds? And yeah, they're birds, but they're very different from a lot of other birds. They're flightless birds, so they cannot fly. But their wings are specially adapted to help them swim through the water. And if you've ever seen footage of a penguin swimming, it's almost like they're flying through the water. So a lot of their wing shape is very paddle shaped. Well, let's see, I'm going to erase a little bit on here. And erasing does not mean that you made a mistake. Erasing just means that you are working on your drawing. You can say that erasing is just as important as drawing itself. And I always like to say there's no mistakes. And so penguins have 3 toes with claws at the end of their feet, or talons. I think it's probably talons. It's claws. Claws, talons. They got pointy things at the bottom of their feet. And African penguins and Rockhopper penguins, the 2 species that live at the aquarium, they live in a place where, well, for African penguins especially, and where there's not much snow. There's a lot of rocks to climb around on. So a lot of times adaptations on an animal can help give you clues to maybe what their habitat is like, or what it's like to be a penguin. So those claws help them to grip the rocks. And for patterns, we've got kind of this going up the side, but African penguins have a bar or a stripe across the front of their chest. And a lot of times they have a different pattern of spots. And for right now, I'm just going to be doing outline drawings. Feel free to color in your penguins. But for me, just like the outline part is a lot easier. And even when I'm making comics, it starts with a sketch, and then I ink that sketch, and then I color it. Color is usually the last thing that I use when I'm drawing. You might have an approach where maybe you start with color first and then you add the line after, and that's totally fine too. There's all different ways to approach drawing. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit on our penguin. And I mention this every time. I'm drawing digitally right now today. It's not necessarily my favorite way to draw, but it's the easiest way that I can share my screen with you and you can see me drawing. I generally prefer to draw with pencil on paper. I am a hands-on person and I just really love to make marks on paper. And again, no right or wrong way to make art. I just like to say that because there's no special tool that's going to make you a better artist. And a lot of the stuff for digital drawing is expensive. I am a professional artist, and a lot of the tools that I use are tools that I need in order to make finished books. But if you're just starting out doing art, plain line paper and a pencil, anything that you can draw on Post-it notes, brown paper bags, anything, like grab whatever you can to draw on and whatever you can to make marks on that. So we're gonna get a little beak, and we'll do a little eye. So we've got our penguin from the front, and I'm warming up a little bit today. I want to try and draw our penguin from the side. We're going to make kind of a penguin character sheet today. So I'm going to use a ruler in here on a different layer to draw a couple guidelines. And this is just going to allow me to look at this penguin and draw it from a different dimension. Let's see what's going on over here. Multiply. And a lot of times if I'm going to be drawing an animal over and over again, or not just an animal, but a character, I like to really think about what they look like across the board. So not just from the side, but from the back, what their actions are doing. And you might see, even for animated shows, you might see something called a character sheet, where it has that character making a lot of different expressions or in a lot of different poses. And it's really helpful for artists, animators to have that because it's kind of a guide, like a reminder. So I'm going to draw just a couple important lines that show us areas. So the bottom of the wingtip, the tail and the back. We'll get a little squiggly on that one. And how about the stripe? Oops. I'm going to make this a little bit faint just so these are our guides. And if you're doing this at home, you can totally do them in pencil and faint lines with a ruler, and then erase them afterwards. So we're going to look at the top part of the head. And again, kind of sausage-shaped body. I'm going to go all the way down to here. Penguin from the side, penguin from the back. Sometimes I sing when I draw, can't help it. Feet. Got those 3 toes. And I might start with just a wedge shape like a triangle and just add the toes at the end. A little line there for our feet. A little triangle. And our tail is actually going to be pretty much invisible from this angle because where the line for our tail is. So you might not see the tail from the front of the penguin, but on the side, it's a little easier. And then wings. So our wings are going to come out to the side and come down to that line. Out to the side and come down to that line. And then beak. So the penguin's beak from the side looks a lot like a triangle, but from the front, and this is in one of the pictures that are cycling through, there's some African penguins from the front. It looks a little different. So let's see if we can get a good idea of what their beak looks like. And I usually say it's kind of like a half circle and a half circle. And then these penguins have a hook on the end of their beak, and that allows them to, or helps them to catch fish and squid that are in the water. Now, the penguins at the aquarium get fed by aquarists, and this makes it a lot easier to care for individual penguins, to note what penguin is eating what amount of fish, because how much an animal eats and when they're eating can be a good indicator of health. So one of the pictures, I believe, has folks feeding penguins, and they'll have a waterproof clipboard with the names of the penguins on there and how much the penguins ate. Now, that is an important thing to note because we have breeding programs with the penguins at the aquarium. So they mate and lay eggs and raise chicks. So thinking about the health of the penguins for a multitude of reasons. Now, there are times of years where the penguins eat a lot more. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it has to do with how they take care of their feathers and stay nice and penguiny. And I'll draw a line from the line. Yeah, so drawing animals front on is sometimes a little hard because they look very different from the front and the side. So we've got this line here, and then this for the plumage. And then we'll do our black spots on the front. So we've got our little character sheet up here. I'm going to get rid of my guidelines and I'm going to put my penguins up here and talk a little bit about penguin behavior. So here's our character sheet there. Let's talk about penguin vocalization. If you've ever been to the aquarium, it's hard to not hear the penguins. So I want to draw an African penguin vocalizing, and you can call it braying or calling. Penguins and lots of birds make sounds to communicate with other birds. And one of the most important parts of a penguin making a sound is that in the wild, adult penguins, when they go to catch food for their young, for their chicks, when they come back, the penguins live in colonies, lots and lots and lots of chicks that to us all look the same and all sound the same. But to a parent penguin, if they call to their chicks, so let's see if I can do my best African penguin impersonation. I'm a little out of practice. They'll listen and see if they can hear their chick. And their chicks sound a little different. Their chicks are more like beep, 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 beep. But the penguin will call and listen for their chick. And just like in your house or your family, you can usually hear the difference between who's calling you for dinner, if it's your, parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles or sisters, brothers. So penguins can also hear differences in other penguins. So they use their voice to communicate. And I always think it's cool because there's so much stuff that animals are saying that we don't understand, but it's really important for them. So this is one of the reasons that it's good for us to study animals and understand how they communicate. And penguins don't just communicate through sound. They have body language and ways that they might pose their body to also communicate to other penguins. And we'll talk about pointing in a second. Penguins tend to be a little territorial, which makes sense. If you're all sharing a rock, you want to be like, hey, this is my space. But we'll go for braying. So got a little wing action in there. Sometimes they'll throw their wings back like that. And I'm going to change the position of the feet in this case. Because the penguin's putting its body backwards, I'm going to have one of their feet facing this way and one of their feet facing this way. And this is a pose that will allow them to balance a little bit better. You can think about it as a person. If both of your feet are close together and you want to move around, you have better balance if you widen your legs and point your feet in a different direction. Kind of out, gives you a little bit more stability. So that's another thing to think about with poses. I'll draw my little middle line, do plumage on there. And when I did my penguin impersonation for you, I'm going to try and think of what it sounded like. So it's like, no. So how would I write that? No. And maybe it ends with a g sound. Do a little word balloon. There is a website online. I didn't check to see if they have penguin vocalization, but there's a website called docets.org, and they have sound recordings of every ocean animal you can imagine, everything from whales to fish. And there are a lot of fish that make noises. I sometimes with my niece, I'll play a game where we'll do like what animal made this sound. And that's kind of a fun game to play. It's kind of like hey, like, I didn't know that fish made a sound. There's a lot of fish actually in the aquarium that make some cool sounds as well. So I'm going to have this penguin close their eyes for their vocalization. And I'll do now. I mentioned that I draw comics about science. So a lot of times I employ things that you see in comics like word balloons, motion lines. Those are all things that help me kind of animate my characters or the animals that I'm doing education about. Well, let's talk about pointing. So I told you that penguins can communicate by sound, by actually vocalizing, making noises. But they can also communicate with body language. So when a penguin points at another penguin, it kind of puts its body and its beak in a straight line at another penguin. So let's see if we can do this. And I don't think I actually had a photo reference for this one. So think about their bodies. In this case, they're bent over. So that sausage shape is kind of bent in half. Their tail go up and wings back. So a lot of times, again, like I'll use my toy penguin, or I'll even watch videos of penguins doing behaviors like this. And I know the aquarium does have a live video feed for the African penguin tank. So if you're interested in doing more of this, it might be worth it to check that out. Just put it on and just watch the penguins and then try and draw what you saw. So much for me drawing nature is drawing from observation. And drawing by looking at something is different than drawing by observing something. Observing is looking with thinking. So when you observe something, you're not just looking at it, you're thinking about how it moves, the ways that its body can move. And even I do this with figure drawing with people, but then also animals. I a lot of times think about their skeleton and their muscles and how they move the way they do. So when you see me drawing like this, I don't have any skeleton penguin pictures, but a lot of times I am thinking about what these animals look like internally. And if you're interested in nature drawing, that's definitely something to think about. Think about your animal's anatomy, and that can give you a lot of insight into how they might move. I'm going to shadow that leg because it's in the background. Give this penguin a little place to stand on, a little rock. We haven't talked about settings yet, but the penguins at the aquarium live on rocks that are made of fiberglass, kind of plasticky rocks, and they try and replicate what the penguins colony would look like back home. So the rocks will often have little caves where penguins can nest in there. I had the incredible opportunity to go to Betty's Bay in South Africa and actually see African penguin colonies in the wild a couple of years ago. And it was really cool. It's also really weird too, because there's just like people's houses and their backyard is, well, not their backyard, but right where their yard ends and where the beach begins is penguin habitat. And for me, who, I love all the birds in New England, but it's really amazing for me to be like, wait, there's like a penguin in that person's backyard. So it's kind of eye-opening to think about animals that we think of as far away or exotic to us are actually just like part of someone else's habitat, depending upon where they live. So a lot of times I try and think about the animals that I don't ever want to take the local animals here for granted. So I think about like my sparrows and my pigeons and try and give them a lot of love and attention, because like they're just as cool as penguins. It's just that we see them every day, so we might overlook them. So if you're not interested in drawing penguins and you're more interested in drawing animals in your local habitat, see what you can see even just out your window. Chances are you'll be able to see some birds. And I am a very like microscopic person, so I like to look for bugs a lot of the times as well. But challenge yourself to look for nature in places that you might not expected, whether it's a park near your house or your front stoop. I feel like my penguin need to do a little bit of changing here. And I'm going to open it up to questions right now. If anybody has questions about penguins or about drawing or just the ocean in general, please feel free to ask them in the comment section. I'm going to do a little anthropomorphizing with my penguin here. Hopefully not to some scientist's chagrin. I'm going to give my penguin a little angry eyes, and I'll explain why in a second. But yeah, if there's any questions, please feel free.
Sure. So, first off, Penelope said about your African penguin impression. That's exactly what it sounds like.
Oh, thank you.
And then she also asked, what type of tablet are you using?
So the tablet I'm using is a Wacom tablet. It is I can't remember the name of it, but it's like, if you look up Wacom, it's their student tablet. It's the cheapest tablet they offer, and this is the stylus. So this is basically like, instead of a mouse, I use a stylus to draw, and I actually use this even in place of a mouse when I'm navigating. It's a lot easier on my wrist and hand. So yeah, I've been using a tablet like this for over 20 years. This is the third one I've had in 20 years. The one before this, if the styluses are important, do not wash them in the laundry, which is this mistake I made. But it's a great beginner tablet if you're interested in working digitally. Again, it's the way that I work, mostly for my coloring work when I'm coloring comics. So it doesn't necessarily make me a better artist, but it's a tool that I use to help make the art that I do.
Perfect. We also got a question from Jasmine, who asked if you could repeat the website where you hear the fish sounds.
Oh, yes. It's docets.org. So actually, you know what? I'm going to write it on the screen if that's okay. I use it a lot for my reference work for fish, just because there's a whole bunch of really cool fish sounds. And if they don't have penguins, I can see if I can find some cool penguin sounds. But yeah, docets is really cool. I'm pretty sure that's it. I could double check. But it's basically like a directory of marine animal sound. And they even have like seals and things like that. I hope they have penguins. I'm going to be bummed if they don't have penguins. And if that doesn't work, I'll see if I can find some more resources to listen to penguins, because they all sound very different. Like an emperor penguin, the first time I heard one, it literally sounds like a locomotive. Like it sounds like a train in the distance. It's like the wildest sound. And then one of my favorite penguins are little blues, and they make some, for being the smallest species of penguins, they certainly have a lot to say. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. So I am going to anthropomorphize a little bit, and that just means making an animal, like kind of putting human emotions onto an animal. And for me, the power of learning about animals, the way that I teach other people, is through storytelling. And I do like to iterate that, like, penguins might not feel anger the way that people feel anger, or, well, I don't know, even happiness. I'm sure that there are times where penguins are frustrated that other penguins are coming into their space, but the reason why they're doing it is not because they're jerks. It's because a lot of times their space has their nest or their chick, and they want to be protective of their family. For curiosity, lots of animals experience curiosity. And it's really important for animals and their environment to be curious about things. And it helps for things like finding food and finding shelter. So when you watch, penguins teach younger penguins, like not juvenile penguins, well, because they usually get, juvenile penguins, because they can swim, they have special feathers. They get taught how to catch food. And a lot of playing, like a parent teaching them to catch fish, is sometimes maybe giving them a fish that's dead already and letting that penguin try and catch it. If you think about, like, it's a lot to be born into this world and then have to learn how to survive. And I think for humans, it takes us so long from when we're a baby to like a kid and to an adult, is that, it's years and years and years of learning, not just like how to eat and feed ourselves, but then beyond that, learning how to cook. And then reading. Like, it's crazy that we learn to read and then write. So there's a lot of stuff that we learn that it takes so long for us to learn that thing that sometimes it's hard to think about it cumulatively. So I like to sometimes draw parallels between what it's like for us and what it's like for these animals, because I think it helps us better understand what life is like for them. And I think when we do that, it helps us also to have a connection with them, so we can help conserve the space that they live, or care for them, or learn more about them. Because I think humans also have a lot of curiosity about the world around them. I'm going to do, actually, you know what? Let's switch to our Rockhopper penguins. Just because I want to switch gears so we have time for our Adelie penguins. So I'm going to take those guys away, and we're going to look at rockhoppers. So there are 3 different subspecies of rockhopper penguins. When I started working at the aquarium over a decade ago, we only really knew about 1. And scientists studied rockhopper penguins enough, and not just where they live, but also their genetics and their groups, to realize that there's actually 3 different subspecies of rockhopper penguins that are independent for each other. So now when you look up rockhopper penguins, there's 3 different types where there used to just be 1. And that's one of the cool things about science, is that a lot of this stuff is ongoing. So we'll look again at our basic things. I talked about penguin morphology, so body shape and the shape and size of them. Rockhopper penguins are going to look a lot like the African penguins in terms of their head shape and their body shape, but you'll notice there's a very distinctive feature up on the top of their head, and that is their crest. They're also a bit stouter, so they're a bit rounder than African penguins, and part of that has to do with they live in slightly colder water. Now, I mentioned that the weather in South Africa is a lot like the weather in Massachusetts, especially along the coast. So right now, the only difference is that it's flipped because of the southern hemisphere. So right now, we're experiencing summer, and South Africa is experiencing their winter. But our climates are very similar. Rockhopper penguins are found a little bit in colder places. So let's start with their body shape and make our little Rockhopper character sheet. And one of the really cool things about Rockhopper penguins, well, other than the fact that, can you guess how they got their name? They're really good at hopping on rocks. And if you examine their feet close up, they have, I think, even more defined talons than the, actually, I think their tail's a little bit lower than the African penguins. And they tend to live in even rockier habitats than the African penguins. And their heads are a little bit more kind of compact into their body. Draw that line there. And a lot of times, even though they can stretch their legs, a lot of times I feel like I'll see African penguins a little bit more sitting, a little bit more hunkered down on their feet. But they also have those 3 toes. They've got beautiful kind of pinkish coral colored feet. And let's go up to our crest here. I can make this drawing a little bigger. Get rid of that line. Oops. So they've got these beautiful yellow feathers up at the top. And that's one of the kind of features of a rockhopper penguin. There are 6, I believe 6 different species of penguins that have crests or around that. So it's not just rockhoppers that have this, but this is definitely a defining characteristic. Their beak shape's a little different. And they have red eyes. Now, for easiness, a lot of times we're just drawing today and we're not talking about color. But again, like I said, feel free to color in your drawings. If you love to use color first and draw after, that's totally fine. So we've got our crest. And one of the things we did not talk about with the African penguins, but we can talk about it with rockhoppers, is that a behavior that penguins do is preening. So I think instead of just doing a single drawing, I'm going to draw a comic about preening. And I really like comics as a way to tell stories because they allow you to tell a little story in panels. So I'm going to put these panels down here, and I'm going to make our Rockhopper penguin a little smaller. So preening is basically cleaning for penguins. It's when they use their beak to take their feathers and kind of push them all in the same direction. And that allows them to care for their feathers. It allows them to have their feathers act as insulation, kind of like a built-in winter coat when they swim. Penguins also have an oil gland right at the base of their tail. So if you ever see a penguin taking its head and reaching down and kind of touching its tail and then wiping its beak on its body, they're wiping oil on their feathers as kind of a waterproofing, so that they can stay a little bit protected from the cold water that they're catching their food in. So even though a lot of the penguins live in warmer places, like the Galapagos penguin lives pretty much on the equator, the water where that penguin catches its food is cold. So they do need a way to kind of insulate themselves. So preening, a lot of times will just look like a lot of using their beak to kind of comb out their feathers. And I bet that you've seen birds preening just if you look at birds here in Massachusetts. It's a behavior that a lot of birds do. Ducks especially, like next time you see ducks in a pond, check them out and see if they're using their bills. So I'm going to draw a Rockhopper penguin preening. So we'll think about their body and think about how they can twist. So that sausage-shaped body now has a bend in the middle. It's like I took a straight penguin body and bent it, because they've got a spine in there. They can bend and move a lot like we can. And I'm going to use some motion lines and have their eyes closed. And don't forget that crest. And sometimes their crest looks like really fancy eyebrows, which I enjoy. Get this guy. This little penguin friend. I'm going to do my feet again. I am dissatisfied with those feet, but that's okay. It's a learning process. And maybe we'll draw a couple little feathers kind of coming off there. Now, when penguins preen, even though it helps their feathers, it's also a lot on their feathers. So they have to renew their coat of feathers every year, and they do this through a catastrophic molt. And molting, you've probably heard that term for animals before. It's kind of like shedding. Basically, they'll lose all their feathers and new ones will grow in. And when that happens, they look a little scruffy, but it's a normal thing that happens to penguins every single year. And the penguins at the aquarium are no exception. They also go through a catastrophic molt. And it's pretty cool to see, because once they have all their new feathers, they look absolutely fantastic. But if you think about it, like molting's not the most comfortable process. So a lot of times when they're molting, they're itching, they're moving around. The biggest thing that they can't do when they're molting is go swimming to catch food. So at the aquarium, they get hand-fed. But in the wild, penguins will bulk up and eat and eat and eat and eat a lot of fish or krill or squid in the ocean to bulk up so that they can last a month or a month and a half while they're molting without eating. So I always thought with penguins, it's kind of amazing that they can go for these long distances, long periods of time without eating food, because it's just how they're adapted to survive in their habitat. So I want to see if I can draw this penguin reaching all the way back to their tail to reach that oil gland. And again, this is just showing it. With comics, there's time that happens between each panel. And we'll give this penguin a little rocky habitat. There. Don't forget that crest. Get our little feet in there. Good gripping feet. I'll try and draw that same rock. And then for the last panel, I'm going to use a little cartooning, and I hope you don't mind, but I think it's my favorite part of what I get to do. I walk this line where I sometimes will do something in my comics that is not happening in real life, but my hope is that the humor that I'm using will help you to remember why an animal does something. So a lot of times I like to give a voice to an animal or do something a little silly cartoon-wise. And in this case, you might have figured out that I've dressed up our Rockhopper penguin a little bit. Penguins already look like they have tuxedos, but penguins don't actually know what tuxedos are. They always look like they're dressed for the occasion. So let's get a little closer on our Rockhopper friend. Make sure we've got that beautiful crest. And maybe we'll do a little happy eye. I'm sorry, sometimes I make myself laugh drawing. I can't help it. I'm going to move this friend down just a little bit. One of the questions that I would get a lot at the aquarium is, can you tell the difference between male and female penguins? And the answer is not really, not by looking at them. If you think about the environment that they live in, they pretty much all need, whether they're a female penguin or a male penguin, they all need the same adaptations to survive in that habitat. So they pretty much look all the same. Now, if you see a penguin lay an egg, that's a female penguin. But these animals live in colonies. They live together. And a lot of times the parents will raise the eggs together. Or like I've actually heard stories about penguins taking on orphan penguins and caring for them as well. And I think it's really cool. But it's a good question just because it's like, oh, like some species look a lot different if you look at males and females, but some species don't. And I think penguins are a cool example of animals that live in often extreme habitats. We're going to get to our Antarctic friends next. So it makes sense that all the penguins would have the same adaptations to help them survive, whether it's the same size or same camouflage. We haven't even talked about camouflage yet with penguins, because I always thought, looking at a penguin, I'm like, wait, it'd be so easy to see a penguin. They're black and white. But we'll get to how they actually. Part of me wants to be like, I'm ready for my close up. I'm ready. Do. So yeah, preening is just a way for penguins to have their feathers going in the right direction for insulation and protection. Now, for camouflage, I'm going to draw a rockhopper penguin swimming. Penguins on land, they don't really look like they have too much camouflage, but you forget that most of the time that penguins are going to be somewhere and be doing something is underwater. So their camouflage is where it counts underwater. A lot of penguins don't have a lot of land predators, but they have a lot of predators underwater. So when we look at a penguin underwater, the part that is usually facing the surface is black. And the part that is facing the bottom is white. And they tuck their feet in like that. So if you were a predator, we'll zoom in and talk about this. This is called counter shading. So double shading. There's some water. If you were a predator, like a seabird that might want to eat a penguin, looking down, if you look down into the water when you're on a boat and you're out of the ocean, it's pretty dark. So that black back helps the penguin blend in with the dark ocean water. Now, if you were a predator below, like a leopard seal or a fish, a larger fish, and you see that white belly, if it's sunny out, the surface of the water is also going to look very bright. So that white belly is going to blend in with the light coming down on the surface. So it's actually incredibly efficient camouflage when you're in the water. So, questions about rockhopper penguins or about comics? Does anybody have any questions? Do some motion lines.
So we do have another question from Penelope, who asked about the software that you're using. Is it Photoshop?
It is Photoshop. So the software that I use is Photoshop. There are alternatives that are free open source alternatives if you're interested in learning to draw digitally. I use Photoshop because it's what I learned on, almost 20 years ago when I started digitally coloring. And it's the program that I'm most comfortable with. And it also supports a lot of the functions that I need to draw. So, sorry, and I should clarify, I mostly don't draw in Photoshop. I draw usually on paper and then color in Photoshop. And when I color comics in Photoshop, because I'm coloring for print, Photoshop supports a format called CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And that's generally what books are printed in. A lot of digital drawing programs for like the iPad only support RGB, red, green, blue, and it's not as easy to print those files. The colors don't stay as true. So forgive me for deep diving into the professional area, but there's some programs that a lot of times folks will use because it can support getting things printed. But part of the reason I use it too is like, it's the program I learned on. So there's some of that as well, because, you know, Photoshop is known for being a photo editing tool, but I'm using it to color cartoons. So yeah, there are a lot of other things other than Photoshop to use if you're interested in. I can see if I can round those up if Penelope, if you're specifically interested in digital drawing. Okie doke. So we're going to go away from the Southern Ocean, and I should mention before we jump from rockhopper penguins, one of the cool things about rockhopper penguins is that they live in and around islands off the coast of South America and in southern Indian Ocean. So these animals are usually breeding on pretty small islands, and scientists have been studying them for a while because when they're on the islands, they're usually breeding or taking a break or resting, right? But for the most part, penguins need to be right near water to catch their food. There's been recording of rockhopper penguins being at sea, like being in the ocean for months at a time, which means they're floating, living in the ocean, even resting while they're in the ocean for months at a time, which I find to be fascinating. Like these truly are birds that depend on the water for their food and to a certain extent for their home. So we're going to travel south to Antarctica. Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't pull up the globe for rockhopper penguins. They have a pretty wide range. But I do want to just pull it up quickly for Antarctica. We're going to go to the bottom. There's a lot of penguins that live in and around the Antarctic Peninsula, but we're going to go over to this side in the Ross Sea and look at Adelie penguins. So I don't know if you can see that very well. It's one of those things where I'm glad that I have a globe because Antarctica is left off of a lot of maps. It's there. It's important. It's a whole continent. But for Adelie penguins, they are even better equipped to deal with the cold. There are about 6 species of penguins that live in and around Antarctica, but Adelie penguins and emperor penguins are the two that kind of really call the continent their home. A lot of the penguins nearby live on islands that are near Antarctica. So Adelies. And these penguins are near and dear to my heart. I got to spend 4 days working with scientists on Cape Royds, which hosts it's home to an Adelie penguin colony that's about, I think there's about 2,000 breeding pairs, so somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 penguins at once. Across the island on Ross Island, there's Cape Crozier, which is a colony of over 200,000 breeding pairs of penguins, so it can host up to like 500,000 penguins. So the colony I was at was pretty small. But Adelie penguins, since I got to see them in their habitat and especially during egg and chick season, I want to talk about what it's like to live in a colony of penguins. So we're going to draw an Adelie. And one of my favorite parts, and again, I'm going to start with that sausage shape. These guys are even more squat. Oh, sorry, I got to turn off my panels layer too. More stout and squat than the rockhopper penguins. They are very much adapted to live in an incredibly cold place. The temperatures on land where the Adelie penguins live can be, upwards of minus 40 Fahrenheit, which also happens to be the same as minus 40 Celsius, but it's cold. And the ocean water they swim in is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 2 Celsius. So it's actually colder than freezing water because ocean water is salty, so it actually freezes at a lower temperature. So they are very specially adapted to swim in the ocean to catch fish. And one of the things I like to pay attention, especially on Adelie penguins, and we'll zoom up for this one, their beak shape looks a lot similar. But when you look close up at an Adelie penguin, they have feathers that go almost all the way to the tip of their beak. Every inch of their body is trying to be protected in things that can insulate. So feathers all the way up to the tip of their beak, and then they have this really cool white ring of feathers around their eye, which makes them look extremely cartoony. So when I draw Adelie penguins, I feel like it's actually not that hard to cartoon them. And their eye coverings aren't just bare skin, they actually have very fine feathers on their eye covering. And again, they're in an incredibly cold habitat, so they need as much warmth as they can get. So we've got our front of an Adelie, and they have that counter shading too, just like our other penguins we talked about. I'm going to draw a little wing on this friend. Now, Adelie penguins have predators both on land and below, but there's really not that many. One of their biggest land predators are a bird called a skua, and skuas are like giant seagulls with super pointy beaks. And it's a food web down there. Everything's got to eat and everything supports itself. So, it's a bummer when a penguin gets eaten by a skua, but at the same time, skua's got to eat. Like it's a circle of life. And in the water, there are leopard seals, which love penguins. They just think they're delicious. But the other two seals down in Antarctica near these penguins are Weddell seals and crab-eater seals. And crab-eater seals actually eat krill. They don't eat crabs. They have a talk about common names. And then Weddell seals eat stuff like krill and fish and squid and stuff. So the penguins don't really have to worry about them. One of the things that penguins in Antarctica seldom see are people. And people are not perceived as a threat to them. So I had guidelines to follow when I was in the colony in terms of how far away I stay from the animals, but I was able to sit on a rock and draw these animals. And the rule is that I just stay as still as possible. If one comes up to me, I don't interact with it, but I just stay still. And it allowed me to get an incredibly intimate observation of these penguins, to see them just going about their daily lives, to see them caring for their chicks. I was there during chick season. And to see them with their environment. So Adelie penguins will make nests out of rocks. And their nests are about 3 feet or 1 meter away from other penguins' nests. And if you were to take a drone or to take a helicopter view of these penguins' nests from above, you can actually see strategically how they're placed. It's kind of like a patchwork of these little rock nests. And it was really cool to watch them build the nests, just because you'd have a penguin come over and it'd be like, hey, I got you a rock. Here you go. I found it. It's pretty good. It's a pretty great rock. I mean, I like it. It's a good rock. It was also really interesting to see the territorial displays. So even though I was watching penguins collect rocks, I was also watching penguins chase each other away from their nests and be incredibly territorial. And again, it's not them being jerks. It's just, defending their space and making sure that their chicks are safe and everything is a big part of their life. That being said, I also do I'm entertained by penguin drama. I can't help it. It just is fun. But I think, since I can't necessarily speak to seeing chicks at the aquarium, although I know that there's lots of blog posts because the chicks get raised behind the scene because they need extra care from the aquarist, I will draw some Adelie penguin chicks just because I had a chance to see them. So we've got a little rock happening here. Put your little tail in there, buddy. And I think I'm going to make this penguin bigger. This is one of the fun parts of working, is like, I can just do this and make this penguin a little bigger. And when I am working in comics, it's really helpful because if any of you out there read comics, it's not just one drawing. It's thousands of drawings and thousands of panels per book. So sometimes I do need things to help me be more efficient in my storytelling and how I make art. And that's not cheating. It's just using what you have to tell the stories that you can. Like I said, I use a lot of photo reference and stuff like that. Okay. So let's move these friends over to the side and let's draw some penguin chicks. Let's see. Here you go, friends. You can hang out up there. So I use a lot of artistic license for my penguin chicks, but I will say they kind of just look like this. They are little balls of floof. That downy feather that they're covered in I told you how cold it was in Antarctica. They need all the protection that they can get. And they don't ever want to be out here by themselves. They are always going to be with a parent, and that parent will help keep them warm. What I did get to see the penguins do, which is really fun, is a parent will stay with one or two of the chicks. Usually there's 1 or 2 chicks that are hatched from a clutch of eggs. I would get to see one of the parents come back and feed the chicks, and that's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's really cool. You basically get to see a penguin come back and like puke into a chick's mouth. But it's basically just like they're making, homemade baby food for that chick. And I think there's all sorts of really neat stuff about, like, I've learned about king penguins recently, which is another species of Antarctic penguin. And like the parents will actually go out for months to go find food for their chicks and come back. And they have special preservatives in their stomach that basically keep all the fish and krill in their stomach fresh, which is like just so wild and cool. One of the main reasons why Adelie penguins are studied in Antarctica is because they are part of a very big Antarctic food web. So a food web is basically a bunch of ways that a habitat and environment is connected in terms of who eats who, and there's food webs everywhere. But there's a lot of environmental protections for Antarctica on land, but there's not a lot of protection for the sea that surrounds Antarctica. And that sea is part of a whole bunch of food for seals, penguins, and then within that, the things they're eating, squid, fish, and then all the way down, you've got all sorts of invertebrates like crabs, awesome sea spiders, bivalves like scallops and clams and things like that. So in 2016, the Ross Sea, a section of the Ross Sea, was actually named a marine protected area. So that means it is an area that globally we agree that it has to have protections in terms of regulating fishing there. There's no mining or anything that can happen there. And it took over a decade of lots of different governments working together to protect this area. So Antarctica is an example of a place that is shared globally. It's agreed upon that Antarctica, the continent itself, is not owned by any one country. There are countries that have stations there, but the whole point of that continent is to do scientific research. There's no mining allowed. You can't use it for military purposes. So it's a really amazing example of a very large place that we've collectively agreed to protect. But at the same time, we need to see those protections through and kind of, make sure. And that's part of the reason why, just going down to study Adelie penguins for a year doesn't give you good data, but studying the colony for 40 years and understanding changes that happen across generations is really important. So I think sometimes it's hard to be patient with science because sometimes we want answers right away, but a lot of times it takes sitting, working together with lots of different people, being patient, looking at data, not just on a small scale, but on a large scale. So there's a lot of science, a lot that goes into science. And I think I helped myself understand that by working with scientists. And I'm working on a comic book right now all about life and science in Antarctica. So I'm hoping that once that book is done, I'll have some of that stuff to share with you so that you can better understand what goes on down there. Because it's a place that not many people can get to. And like I said, one of the best ways to travel the globe when you can't physically travel is through books, through documentaries, or through access, like talking to scientists and people that have been there, or even just people that live there, that live in different places. I had mentioned last week that there's a lot of really cool citizen science stuff, so you can look in your own community to see if there's any ways that you can be active scientifically. There's also citizen science that happens globally. A year or two ago, scientists in Antarctica needed help counting Weddell seals. And it was really cool because people all over the world helped count the seals, and that actually helped scientists get that amount of data. So people working together to help scientists get data and help us understand these places are great. And if you want to know more about both that citizen science project and the research being done with these Adelie penguins, you can visit Penguin Science. I believe it's penguinscience.com. I'm sorry, I apologize for my handwriting. And on their classroom resources, they have a lot of really cool information on Adelie penguins. When it's summer down there, it's our winter, so they have live penguin cams. So you can't watch them now because right now Antarctica is in its winter, so it's completely dark, and all the penguins are out to sea right now. But I definitely recommend checking that out if you want to learn more about Adelies, and check out the Aquarium's website if you want to learn more about the African penguins and the rockhoppers that are there. Are there any questions before we wrap up for the day? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out today and drawing with me. I'm going to be doing this every single Friday in June here on the Aquarium's Facebook page, and showcasing kind of different animals that we care for at the aquarium, but also about their lives outside of the aquarium as well. If you have the means to do so, please donate to the aquarium. They're a really cool community resource, but right now we're doing stuff a lot virtually or remotely just to keep providing those resources while the aquarium is closed during these times. And if you have any questions for me, you can find me on the internet, both on Twitter and Instagram at Maris Wicks, or you can visit my website, mariswicks.com. And thank you all so much for coming out today and drawing with me. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope you all have a great day.